Alright everyone, as though people didn't have enough reason to be worried about the state of especially US-Russian affairs, although things are warming up with China, that's great, and maybe China's moving west, which would be wonderful. India certainly is. Pakistan, meanwhile, is moving east, talking to the Russians more along with the Turks. The world political situation is a bit topsy-turvy. But now we've got something far worse to worry about, which is that the US and Russian governments, a lot of people haven't noticed this, but they've basically openly declared it to be phase 2 of the Cold War. They've come out. The US strategy this time around is, hey, we're not going to build more nukes. We're going to work on different types of nukes for the warheads we have, number one. Different strategies in the application and potential use of nuclear weapons, number two. This comes in the wake, this report, 2 days after the Status 6 stuff that the Russians were doing with regards to their own nuclear posture. We are literally back in Dr. Strangelove, and a lot of people don't even know it. They look around, they see, well, the world is basically the same as before, some corruption, some problems and stuff, but, I feel fine. We're in the middle of a Cold War. Things haven't been as dangerous as they are now since the 1960s. It really is that bad. We're on the eve of destruction, and there are people before the last time when we were on the eve of destruction. People spawned all sorts of frenetic music, turned on, tuned in, dropped out. They did a bunch of drugs, had orgies, laid waste to their bodies and minds because they were convinced they were going to die in hellfire. They're like, well, we got to do something about it. Let's pray to the vibes. Let's talk to some Kama Sutra master and have an orgy and see if we can stop the Vietnam War. You have a proxy war that doesn't even involve direct conflict between the two nuclear poles. It spawns a whole subculture. This time around, and since Iraq, the anti-Iraq war movement, I can remember when, you had six-figure sums of people marching on D.C. to say no more war. Lately, though, it seems like tens of thousands of people a year can be killed by drone strikes, and there aren't that many people that actually give a damn anymore. There really isn't that much of an anti-war sentiment at the moment in the United States, and it boggles my mind. Because I can remember when the same people who said, hell no, we won't go, I'm going to set up a tent next to the Washington Monument, I guess they got jobs or they got knocked up and now they don't have time to protest anymore. How funny how that happens between generations. It was exactly what I was worried about. At the time I ruminated. This is like 2007. I was like, I hope that my generation actually sticks to its guns and doesn't abandon those principles. Unfortunately, it abandoned them way, way worse than the hippies. Like the hippies came back from their acid-soaked camps. And they switched to cocaine. They kept using drugs, so they didn't sell out on that, but they started using shitty drugs. Ones that they may feel really good, but they get addicted and end up homeless half the time. Start snorting coke and using heroin and meth. And become yuppies. They become wine-slugging, coke-snorting, suit-wearing, short-haired yuppies, exactly like their parents, exactly what they hated. And that was very funny. They sold out. It was the worst generation. No offense to people who are there. Some of you are still wizened old pot-smoking wizard mode. Okay, that's fine. And everyone does have to make a living, but, it was very funny to see it being like the literal flip of a coin to its other side in that token. The millennials, though, we've done worse. We get fucked by the recession. We get fucked by war. The government fucks us in the ass constantly for half a decade. And what do we do now? Now the millennials turn around. They're like, oh, we want more government. We're pro-socialist now. Are you insane? It's so funny. Then we're in a Cold War, and a lot of people don't even know it. They don't even talk about it. You don't hear it from the media. I guess it's because the lamestream media doesn't talk about it. None of the normies care. Ron Paul will talk about it. He cares. And the same people who lionized him, now they're like, but he's like an evil Republican. The same people that were like, oh, cute grandfatherly Ron Paul who wants to stop World War III. Now they're like, oh, he's an evil right-winger. He's like a Nazi now. That's crazy talk. It's like a total selling out by the entire millennial generation. So I get to see most of the people, maybe from my graduating class, they're all topsy-turvy. They're off doing their jobs now. It's just the funniest shit I've ever seen. It's hilarious to me. It really is funny. It's am I the last millennial that sort of represents that original millennial-ism of, hey, fuck you? It seems to be. There are less and less people who do that. There are more and more people, I guess they got the 9 to 5 and now they just want to go to Starbucks. They need to go work so they can afford the stuff that they need in order to get up in the morning and go work. Their car payment, their mocha latte, all the wonderful things. And in the same breath that they do all this, they say fuck capitalism. So it's I don't think they know exactly what they're talking about. Cold War II is arguably more insidious than the first. Now, the DC-style Pentagon assumption that they're making, their papers right now, they come out and say, well, we're working on the possibility of, smaller nuclear weapons, maybe more of them, but they'll be smaller, battlefield capable of. We tried this strategy in the mid-1950s with the Davy Crockett device. The worry was, unfortunately, there were several problems. Number one, a lowly field commander might start a nuclear war. Number two, the odds that a president would authorize the use of a nuclear weapon that's designed to wipe out a military base instead of a whole town is higher. It's catastrophically higher because there's not the same psychological effect. Pressing a button and killing 10 million people is harder than pressing a button and killing a few thousand individuals who solely represent a military in order to wipe out some planes and tanks. It's a big difference psychologically between the two. It would be easier to press the latter button. You're still deploying a nuke. You're still possibly starting the end times, but the idea is that it's easier for you to make that decision, and so you should avoid it. We had all these devices. We had very small nuclear weapons. It's possible. The Russians have claimed this for decades, that they had nukes that were so small they could be carried around 30, 40 pounds in a briefcase. A heavy briefcase that would have a nuclear device big enough to destroy a few city blocks and release a little mushroom cloud, irradiating everything in its footprint and rendering it useless. Just a 100-yard wide, 20-foot deep crater basically is what you'd have left. It's possible they actually designed it. It wouldn't have been much smaller than a Davy Crockett. It was a 55-pound device that was shot out of a field cannon. You would have a pickup with a cannon on the back. You fit it on the cannon and you fire it. It's literally like the Fat Man in the Fallout series, only obviously larger and not shoulder-mounted. I don't think that a spring-loaded shoulder-mounted launcher would be sufficient for it. It's possible. We designed these weapons. We tested these weapons. They work. They would have been devastating to an enemy column that's attempting to advance. The problem is, there are several problems with such weapons in that sense. First was, at least back then, we couldn't fire them far enough to reliably make sure that the people firing it weren't committing suicide by irradiating themselves. Of course, 2-mile maximum distance under optimal conditions is not necessarily far enough to make sure that the fallout, if the wind's blowing back towards you, doesn't, destroy you. You'd have to fire it and then run really, really fast. Even then, of course, you might be fucked. Another problem is, of course, the temptation to launch is greater. Another problem is, wouldn't this necessitate developing new weapons as well? Because I'm not sure that we have any nuclear material that is currently in a form capable of being used in such devices. Maybe I'm totally wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. Meanwhile, the Russians are taking up the same dumb line they used during the Cold War too. Look, the U.S. took up the make it smaller and more accurate line. And then, play around on the side with naval and air assets capable of delivering, countering enemy attack, all the technical stuff. The Russian idea was, we'll make it bigger. We'll make more of them. The problem is it looks like they're doing the former with this Status 6 weapon, assuming that that's the case, that it's a tsunami weapon, an undersea nuclear tsunami torpedo, which is insane. It looks like they're doing that. What if they carry through with the other part? That means they're going to go back to building more nukes and testing them. It's only a half a step from them doing so. That would plunge us back into exactly the kind of Cold War, very visibly, that we had before. This one's it's the same as the drone-based war we've got in the Middle East. We're at war in a half a dozen countries. But you don't know that because it's covert. It's not like W. W goes in with 500,000 troops, lays waste to things, puts on his fucking cowboy hat and says, "Yeehaw, we're going to kill us some Arabs. We're going to start a nuclear war, America #1. That's what George W. does. Obama, and Trump has, more or less followed this, more silent about it. Well, we're still going to kill a bunch of people. We're going to do it with drones. So, it's become a problem. And we've still got a Cold War. It's just a covert Cold War that people don't realize. Look, nobody's bringing up the specter of Cold War, in discussing. The lamestream media is not saying, hey, the Cold War is back, people. You do realize we get annihilated by nukes tomorrow. Somebody would say, well, that's just bullshit. We survived it before. Don't worry, America, and our president's a Russian agent, so don't worry too much. And it's bullshit. It's total bullshit. People could get wiped out, vaporized tomorrow because of one mistake in one fucking server attached to a weapon tomorrow. You know, in Russia, in the US, in China, wherever it happens to be, they could get vaporized tomorrow and they don't even care. They're too busy worrying about where the Dow Jones is going to go. They're too busy worrying about whether you should bake the fucking cake. They're too worried about whether someone's a Nazi because they said, well, yeah, I believe race exists and is meaningful. That's important. That's substantial to them. But nuclear threat? Armageddon, who cares? Nobody cares about that. Apparently, it's not as exciting as Nazis indoctrinating your kids on 4chan or on YouTube. Well, that's just dumb. That's called being a moron. These millennial soccer moms really have problems. They get the same fucking problems as maybe the parents of the hippies. Oh, good. Don't worry too much about this, you know, Cold War standoff stuff. I'm worried little Jimmy just dropped acid. Well, you shouldn't be. You should probably drop acid too at that point because you'll probably get vaporized as well. You're in some town or some city somewhere, gets irradiated, gets totally wiped off the face of the earth. Nothing will live there for 1,000 years. People are talking about, ooh, someone said something unkind online. We got to crack down on cyberbullying. We got to stop bots, stop spam. Who cares? It's meaningless. That's about all. Peace out.